You guys are good to go.
Oh, good. Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Supervisor Moore,
Here.
Councilwoman McNamara. Here. Councilman Iacilli.
Here.
Councilman Pell.
Here.
Councilman Martell.
Here.
Thank you. We're going to start the work session today with an update of the Damascus Road landfill.
Right. To begin, so filling in where
Deputy Supervisor John Ortiz.
Supervisor John Ortiz, filling in where the prior Deputy Supervisor Frank Sapone oversaw since 2022 at least work at the Damascus Road landfill, the New York State Brownfield Program project. We've had two separate consulting engineering firms, one MacTech and one D&B, conduct their remedial investigation as overseen, which will be overseen by the DEC, is overseen by the DEC. The purpose today is three, perhaps fourfold. One is to give you an update via our principal geologist, Tom Fox, who will be here in a moment. We also have the engineers professionals from WSP MacTech. Welcome, Tom.
Good morning.
Tom, hi, welcome.
Apologize.
No,
John
that's-
Benvenga,
Hit the traffic.
we all had that problem.
John Benvenga and Eric Weinstock, who are on Zoom with us today.
Hello.
So there's an update that the final report that they are presently polishing now in final form, nearly 500 pages. I've received and reviewed the draft. We're here today to give you guys a good thumbnail sketch of what that will look like in its final form that will come out next month.
How about taking it back one step further, just to how this all got started, just as a brief overview?
Property came to the town in approximately 1948. It was decommissioned in the late 90s. Finally, it was determined and to be eligible and be included in the Brownfield project, or the Brownfield program, such that the site needed to be remediated and have a remedial investigation to determine the nature and extent of what contaminants were in the groundwater, were in the soil, and outside off-property groundwater, which Tom Fox will be able to address and speak at length with. That's essentially where we are. So in the handouts handed to each of you today is a synopsis of work that's been completed. Tom will be able to go through that. Also, with that, there are diagrams for what was found generally. As you wish, he can discuss it specifically. There's a second handout which talks about the Brownfield cleanup program and the arc of the investigation from the beginning all the way through the end, as well as two other things that will be discussed towards the end. One will be, what can we expect moving forward once this report is received by not just the town board, but also submitted to the DEC, and what actions they are likely to take and in what time frame. Part and parcel of that will be what intermediate remedial measures will have to be undertaken by the town, including encapsulating the property with a fence, and or ultimately decide, what do you want to do with this property? Is this property going to have solar? Is this property going to be athletic fields? Is this property going to be remediated and then just left alone? Whatever the town wants to do is prepared to finance. So we can discuss all those. The other thing, importantly moving forward, is there needs to be a contract amendment and extension of time relative to the contract with MacTech for another year. Although no new monies are requested, there is an existing balance. But for Tom Fox's work at D&B, there needs to be not only an extension of time and a contract amendment for that, but also additional monies, which Tom will be able to address specifically. So generally, we're going to go through what the investigation has revealed to date, and then any specific inquiries you have You have the gentleman here, Tom here, Eric and John on Zoom, who will all be best able to address your inquiries.
Thank you for that overview. So when you said it's eligible for the brownfield program, is that what got this whole plan initiated, that the town initiated because we wanted the
Yes.
designation, or did the DEC come to us and say, you've got some issues here?
Is in the program now. So basically, you've already, we're roughly 50% through the process, I would say.
But what was the process? Was the process so that we could designate this parcel as a brownfield? Or
Right,
was
and
it,
there's certain benefits to being in the brownfield program as opposed to not being in. And that's mainly when you go to develop it. And typically what happens is part of the development, you also clean it up, is you get tax credits for development of that site. So it's a beneficial program. They try to expedite the process where possible to get the site cleaned up. So there are tax incentives to develop the property. They're kind of complicated. There's certainly, when we get to that point, we can certainly talk about how that works. But it is a good program to be in as opposed to outside and not getting that benefit, because you're essentially going to have to do the same thing with the property.
I mean, we have another landfill in North Sea that we capped. I
Right.
don't know, was that designated as a brownfield?
No, that would be just strictly a landfill. Now, this really is not, in a classic sense, a landfill. It's really, I would characterize it as a dump, for lack of a better description. It's a 10-acre parcel. People left material there.
Speak of like the history of Long Island. So in the history of Long Island, before we had municipal landfills, people would go to a spot in the neighborhood and
If there was
dispose
a
of.
hole in the ground, they would fill it. But in this case, it's a much smaller site. It's only 10 acres. And even our investigation did not really find true landfilling where you would actually see buried waste. We see a lot of garbage mixed into the shallow surface, which is good because it's easy to rectify versus a true landfill. And you know how much money you probably spent on capping North Sea landfill. That's not this. This is a different beast altogether. It's much smaller in scale. But we do have some contamination.
Was it always owned by the town? I missed that part. You said it was decommissioned in the late 90s, but
And then animal control used it for a while.
And there were
Right, there used to
firefighting.
be a building for animal control, I guess, a dog pound. They demoed that sometime. I'm not sure exactly when they
When the
demoed
Southampton
it.
Animal Shelter came in to take it over, basically they demoed that building that animal control was using up there.
There's no structures on site now. But if you want, I can jump in and just give you the overall. I put together the presentation. I know John gave you handouts. I have more handouts if you need them. But if you like, or I can entertain more questions as
no,
we
I just
go.
wanted a little background because we, the three of us weren't on the board at the time
Right.
when the investigation commenced.
Right. I met maybe a little over a year ago, maybe, with the board, and gave you kind of an update too.
Saying that the DEC was changing the things that they were
Right.
requiring us to investigate, and it was going to take longer and cost more.
Right, and that's, again, goes back to the reason for the amendment is the amount of work that the state required really expanded our project as a whole.
Like, could we contest any of the stuff that they're asking for, like fish sampling?
Can you what?
Contest any of the stuff that they're asking for, like the fish sampling?
Seems like they keep
Well, it's
moving the
done already.
goalposts.
Oh, it did,
right?
It
okay.
is, it's all, everything's completed,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, that just seems like they're using us to do a study.
I wouldn't call it, they're not necessarily using this as a vehicle to make a research project out of it. What they were really looking to do is address
How deep the
you know,
contamination?
potential exposure. People catch the fish, they eat the fish. Hey, the contamination is south of Montauk Highway. It's reaching the surface water, and therefore there is a potential that it could be impacting.
There's
the
also
fish.
there's also the Gabreski Air site, which is
Well, and then
probably more
and
of a
again-
contributor than this is.
from a scale point, the Gabreski Airport is much larger, much bigger issue.
Mhm.
This is a postage stamp type site, compared to an airport, but it has the same type of contaminants. And we know, most of us all know nowadays what the forever chemicals are because it's in the media, it's on the news. It's the same situation here, related to likely they use firefighting foams, likely. Somebody did it. There's no hard record on who did it, when it happened, but it's the most likely scenario that there was some fire training on site. It was an open area and probably a good area to light up a vehicle and train the firemen on it. So that's the likely scenario. The good news is it's pretty isolated, and when I get through the presentation, I kind of will show you where it is on the site and how it's affecting off-site, which is minimal. So,
I will hold the rest of my questions until the end.
but does everybody know where the site is?
I live across the
roughly?
street.
Yeah. Anybody been to the site?
Yes.
Okay. It's really not much there. What's interesting, and I'll get into it, is there are some mounds on site, and the graphics illustrate that. And that's something, in addition to the actual PFAS contamination that we're focused on, that would have to be managed. But even if the site was clean and you wanted to redevelop it, you're going to have to do something with those mounds because they're full of.
Where did they come from?
Again, it's years ago. It was probably just unregulated dumping that occurred.
So in the mounds is
And
garbage.
somebody at one time decided to grade the site, and they probably pushed a lot of the material into these mounds. Now the site is so overgrown, it's even hard to see the mounds in the summer because the site's so overgrown. But some of these mounds are, 10, 15 feet high, and they're scattered throughout the site, mostly in the southern portion of the site. So in addition to the contamination, you would still have to address this unregulated waste on the site that's not necessarily contaminated, but it's just old cars, washing machines, the typical stuff you might find.
That's, you know what's in the mounds?
Well, it's a mixture of soil and waste, but it looks to be mostly soil.
Soil?
There are half car. There's a old bus sticking out of one hill.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's hard to say what you're going to find when you finally get there, but from our observations, it just looks like very often what you call it is white waste. Refrigerators, washing machines, car parts, miscellaneous things. We didn't really see anything in the way of drums, which is always a red flag. And for the most part, and when we get into the graphics, you'll see most of the material is sufficient and first few feet based on our test pits that we completed, which a test pit is just basically a trench. We get an excavator and we open up the ground just to see what's in there.
Go through the presentation.
Yeah,
Sure. So,
proceed.
I think the best way to do it is, and that's what I did is, I know John gave you a copy, but I would just go straight to the graphics and I'll talk from there. The outline is pretty detailed, and I think this certainly is going to help you. Maybe I'll use this as a guide. I'm not going to go through everything, otherwise we'll be here for another 40 minutes probably. But if you look at the first graphic, the site location map, so basically it's off of Lewis Road at the end of Damascus Damascus Road. It's about 10 acres in size. It's not fenced. We went through some of the history. Apparently, at one time it was used as a landfill, but there's no real records that show it was truly used as a landfill.
Like not a municipal.
Right, exactly. It's not a North Sea landfill, which was regulated, designed as a landfill.
An unspoken kind of thing.
What's that?
Like an unspoken place. For
Well,
people
and I would even call it like before regulations were even in place to design an engineered landfill. So whatever occurred here was pretty minimal from what we can see as far as true landfilling, because we never actually discovered or came across an actual zone of buried waste. What we found was it's just a mixture of soil. Doesn't mean that it's not there. We can't poke a hole in every spot on the site, but from what we could see, it's mostly superficial in nature.
From talking to residents, it was pretty much just they would dig a hole, they would bring their household trash there, maybe a couch, chair
Right.
here
So
and there, and then they would dig a new hole and they would dump, it wasn't like North Sea where they would continually
Right.
dig and
Well,
turn the trash and.
it wasn't an organized operation. From what
Hey, Tom?
we could see. Yes.
Sorry, this is John from MacTech WSP. Excuse me for interrupting. I think I would just add, or maybe help try to clarify. It sounds to me one of the things that should be understood is that the North Sea landfill was a permitted, legal operation.
Right.
What happened at Damascus Road was not. And there are regulations governing the deposition of solid waste. You can't just go to any open lot and dump solid waste. That's illegal. And so unfortunately what you have, even though the material may be superficial in nature, is an illegal landfill. And that is,
or isn't?
the DEC has to address it, or will want that addressed and cleaned up because it was not operated in accordance with the regulations.
It's so odd that the town would buy a piece of property and then just, not even look and monitor it, and people were just dumping their things
Well,
there.
and again, I would add to what John is saying is that a lot of this occurred before there were regulations in place. So now, New York State's Part 363 regulations are very detailed on what you got to do, on how to make a landfill. This is pre all those type of regulations. So it's really not on the radar screen as a true landfill. And I go back to the term, it's a former dump.
But technically, it's an illegal landfill is what,
I guess you could classify it as that. It's certainly not meeting the current requirements of Part 360 or 363. But again, that's where we're going to be eventually, where whatever non-compliance issues there are, we're going to address in the final site redevelopment cleanup.
That's right. The DEC will look to bring that into compliance one way or another. It'll have to be closed. And that's one of the things that'll have to be determined as part of the overall remediation effort is how that material is dealt with. They will hold you to the solid waste regulations amongst others in terms of remedying the site.
So I think generally we covered the site history. As far as just quickly, as far as the where we got to where we are with the state, in 2018, the state did their own investigation. And again, this was related to a statewide program that New York State DEC undertook to look for potential sites with emergent contaminants. Now, to back up, I was touching upon emergent contaminants, forever chemicals, primarily what's called PFAS.
Mhm.
So that's what we're dealing here with. So New York State DEC, with the fact that this was a new type of contaminant that everybody is starting to realize is throughout our environment, they did an inventory. They said, where in our state could we possibly find that? Long story short, for the historical reasons given, the state identified that as part of that program. They went in 2018 and did a very limited study to find if there was PFAS on site. well, they did find PFAS on site, and they found it in groundwater at fairly high concentrations. And that's what precipitated the process of the town entering into the brownfield program. The town hired a consultant, which, not getting into the details of the mergers and what have you, but the original consultant now is currently with WSP. So moving forward, we just refer to that consultant, which these guys are part of, is WSP.
Thank you. Just for the public's edification, I understand brownfields are different than superfunds. I don't know if you deal with both, but could you just explain a little bit of the difference so we know what we're dealing with specifically and what categorizes a superfund separately from a brownfield?
Yeah, well, it's really a regulatory. It's not a contaminant distinction or engineering distinction. It's really, you're in a program that would follow the same basic regulations if you were in the Superfund program and you were under a consent order, and the state telling you, you have to clean this up.
So it's essentially this, it's similar? It's the same?
Yes, other than the brownfield.
Yeah, Tom, I can
has
speak a little bit to the
incentives.
history of that. When I was first brought in by Frank Zappone, the Office of Materials Management had put in the 3 monitoring wells that you talked about earlier. And they did find PFAS, and the state wanted to list this property as a state Superfund site. There's really no benefit to being a state Superfund site. It's not a good program to be in. You only go into that if you have no other choice. When I met with Frank, I asked him what he wanted to use that land for, and he had mentioned that they were already thinking about solar panels. So I had suggested to him that if he voluntarily entered into the brownfield program, you could go through the regulatory process the same way you would in the Superfund program, except you can roll the remedy into the program. So in other words, in the Superfund program, if you have to dig out contaminated soil, you do that as a remediation effort. In the brownfield program, if you want to put in solar panels, you can dig out the contaminated soil and at the same time prep the land to put in the solar panels. So you roll the remedy into the future use of the property. When I explained that to Frank, he said, yes, that sounds like a great idea. And we actually had to go through the effort of applying to the brownfield program, and we were admitted. So it's a much better place to be in.
So Eric, is it fair to say then that the brownfield program yields more remediation opportunities than the Superfund?
The remediation is similar. The difference is in the Superfund program, you just remediate it to get it clean. In the brownfield program, you're allowed to incorporate the next land use into the remediation. So instead of just having an open field when you're done, you have your new project.
So,
and there's also tax credits that you're eligible for to help pay
there
for
are certain benefits, right? So just forgive me if I'm getting ahead of your presentation, but I'm aware of various Superfunds and brownfields, and I'm of the understanding that sometimes, and I don't know if this is north, west, east, south. Is that how this is depicted here? I'm okay.
Well, that's a good point.
So I guess just in following that, some of these Superfunds and brownfields have shown that the contamination can spread depending on the topography. Do you have any? Have you identified anything?
We're going to get into that in the presentation. Basically, there's your soil contamination that's on the site. But that soil contamination has also contributed to groundwater contamination over time, and that's what the state found in 2018.
Right.
So for the most part, the soil stays on site, doesn't migrate, but the leaching of that contaminant into the groundwater, then it flows with the natural flow of groundwater. So, and again, if you look at just generally on the figure, north is up, groundwater flows south. Southeast. So when we get further into our discussion, you'll see that groundwater contamination has migrated with the flow of groundwater towards basically Montauk Highway. And if you know where Alcott's Pond is on Montauk Highway, that appears to be where the plume, we call it a plume.
Right.
We try to avoid using that term, but in all practical sense, it's a groundwater plume. It's certainly not as extensive as, again, I'll take Roberski Airport as an example. It's not at that level.
How fast does it travel?
I'm sorry?
How fast does it travel to the plume?
Well, groundwater on Long Island travels relatively quick. It's a couple foot per day. So if you have something that's on site for 10 years, it could easily travel several miles. In this case, it can only travel so far before you reach the bay, which it has. And hence, that's why the state required us to do a fish sampling, which, again, I'll get to the punchline or the end. The fish sampling has demonstrated that it's not an issue.
Okay, I just have a follow-up question on the comment of us entering into the brownfield site for the purpose of solar. That use wasn't really brought to the community. There were no hearings on that. Like, they haven't been involved in deciding that's what the property wants to use. Or is it specific to our brownfield site remediation that solar is the end result, or can that change?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's one of the possible ultimate site uses.
Okay.
And a benefit, just to compartmentalize that thought, is that, and I've spoken at length already with Kearsarge about this, who did the North Sea Solar Project, is that they can come in while the remediation is ongoing, work the cap, and essentially they're part of helping us pay for the remediation, capping it, and then putting everything on. And then they're paying for it, a lot of what we would have to pay for ourselves in any event. And then we would be able, obviously, as a North Sea, to lease the land and to get the energy credits. So
Yeah,
they're-
this is more of a residential area than the North Sea landfill was.
Much.
And I think we would definitely need to go to the community with that use and get their feedback.
Especially if there's batteries up there.
And I think the whole solar option was when Frank Capone, I think he, and you.
Right. I
They
just-
looked at this looking for other sites to do what they did at the
Right, and it's certainly from a installation standpoint, it's a good site for solar. You know, the whole community acceptance is another matter.
Tom, I would just add one, relative to the issue of Superfund versus brownfields, one of the other factors is that under brownfields, tends to be for people who are, or owners who are interested in using the property, they're volunteering to address the issue, and they want to reuse the property in some fashion. They want to, that's what the brownfields is about. It's promoting reuse of the property as opposed to just abandoning it, right? Contaminated properties, nobody wants them. So the brownfield program helps interested parties remediate and at the same time revitalize, reuse it for some purpose. Superfund people, the property owners tend to not want to be involved. They don't want to address the issue. Thus, under Superfund, the state compels you to do it. You're under order. It's more of a legal, really, distinction. When you have an uncooperative property owner that doesn't want to address the issue, the state comes in and compels them under Superfund. Under brownfields, it's more of a voluntary relationship, thus help revitalize the property at the same time. That's really one of the main distinctions between the two. What the end use ends up being could be anything, but it's more the issue that you do want to do something and redevelop this property.
And so,
Thank you, John.
and so your work and state DEC, I imagine, has determined that this site is acceptable for reuse of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimately, that's the goal for everyone.
So now you're saying that this DEC along the way, since we retained your services, has required certain things be analyzed, and that's what's in the report that you're ready to submit to them, that you've checked all the boxes that they've asked.
Yes.
We don't know what's going to happen next, so.
Well, the process, and again, we're jumping around, but that's fine.
Well, no, I don't, go ahead, you
No, I'm
proceed
just-
with your description of what's happening.
The process will be, we submit the report to the department for their review. Typically, it takes 30 to 60 days before, sometimes longer, but we can always encourage them to get us their comments as quickly as they can. I'm confident that it's a solid program, that they're not gonna come back and ask for a lot of new things. I think we're in a good position where we can advance to the next stage, which would be doing a feasibility engineering analysis to determine what needs to be cleaned up in conjunction with whatever the town decides they want to use the site for.
What's the timeline typically on something like that?
The town can choose something other than.
Well, no, the other before the town makes a decision on all that. What's the procedural process with your submission?
Going through the process, we would submit this report.
Right.
They may have some comments. They may say, no, the report is acceptable as it is, advance to the next stage. And the next phase would be doing an engineering analysis, feasibility analysis, and it would be combined in with site development. And again, we would work with the town. This is where the fun stuff starts, because now you guys decide what you want to use it for and how we combine whatever needs to be cleaned up with that development. And that gives us certain advantages, because in some cases, if you have to put a asphalt pavement, that actually doubles as what we would call a cap, just like the North Sea landfill has a cap. But this would just simply be the asphalt pavement.
Tom, what is typically the turnaround time for the regulatory agency reviewing your report?
Typically 30 to 60 days, sometimes longer. I think we'll get a fairly quick turnaround on this. So if we submit it in July, which there's no reason we can't get that out after the long weekend, we're looking at probably September, early September, getting comments. We would finalize the report before the end of the month.
And then get back to us with that information.
It goes back to the state and they give its blessing. And typically what they would say is, yes, you can start the next phase, which again is the engineering analysis to determine how to address the contamination along with site redevelopment.
What, they would say that? What did you say? After they accept our report and
The
findings.
RI report that
Do
we
you
have.
want to maybe go to the flow chart?
Sure, there is a
So
flow
there's a
chart
flow
here.
chart that was handed out, looks like this,
Love a flow chart.
and it shows literally from the beginning all the way to the ultimate end use, 2 pages.
I don't have a copy, but if you go to basically the second page.
And the timeframe's also discussed on page 6 of the agenda today.
Thank you.
So basically, if you look at the first page, the bottom third says investigation. So we're at the issue investigation report. So actually, if you look.
That's right. We're at the issue investigation report, and there's a red box there.
Investigation, submit report. So we're right here at that first box. So the DEC is going to receive that report. They're going to review it, obviously, and they're going to comment on it. They're going to either say there's no further action or there is requirements. And basically here, there's going to be some type of action required.
What's NFA decision?
No further action.
No further action.
And again, just going through the process, DEC, after they make that decision, they would approve the investigation report, and then it goes to remedy selection at the very end of that flow path. So you go to the second page, and then you start at the remedy selection. So again, this is the process I was trying to verbally describe, where the remedies, scoping, tracking RI, you develop a remedial work plan. That remedial work plan is essentially the plan that we come up with the town to say, okay, let's just use it as the solar farm as an example. It's going to be a solar farm. It's going to have, a fence. It's going to have facilities related to that. We're going to combine grading of the site, removal of the junk from the piles, and then maybe addressing the area of the soil contamination that we've identified. That all gets
What do you mean, maybe? I mean, won't the DEC require that?
It's hard to say. There are exceedances of certain standards in the concentrations. So my guess is they're gonna require something, but that may not mean necessarily digging it up and shipping it away. It may mean, hey, you know what, just put a cap on it. Again, going back to the whole concept that in the brownfield program, part of the redevelopment, be it a building footprint or a parking lot, can very often be part of the remedy for the contamination. My sense tells me that they may want some limited soil removal because it's accessible, it's shallow, it's open, it's not 100 feet down. It's feasible to address.
Yeah, that would be in the phase that they call the alternatives analysis. It's the first large box on the second page. You have to go through the universe of different alternatives that would work here, and then you're allowed to pick the ones that are the most feasible. So the first red box there, the DEC approves remedial investigation. That's a big milestone to pass because you're at a point where the responsible party and the state both agree on the nature and extent of the problem. Up until that point, there's no complete diagnosis of what you need to deal with. But at that point, the state and the responsible party both agree. And then you're allowed to move on to the alternatives analysis, which are leave the soil in place and treat it, dig the soil out and move it to a landfill, whatever different alternatives you want to consider. And then you work through a process with the state and you select the remedy that they'll allow you to implement.
I have a question.
And again, the advantage of being in the brownfield program is when you're going through the alternatives analysis and implementing the alternatives, you incorporate the next land use into that. So you're not just putting down a cap. At the same time that you're putting down a cap, you're putting down the foundation for the next structure you want to use on the property.
So is it different standards on how far they want you to go? Depends how you use it. Like say if you want
The cleanup standards in Superfund and brownfields or in oil spills, they're all the same. You use the same standards, but the brownfield program allows you to implement the future land use into the remedy. That's the big selling point.
There are different guidance cleanup standards for property use. If you're going to use it for a daycare center, it's going to require a more conservative approach cleanup versus if you wanted to turn it into a solar farm.
so I was saying, say
There are different levels.
if in the future if they wanted to make it
unrestricted.
a bike trail or a hiking trail,
And very often that's
skate park or
the park option usually gives you the option to use the more let's call them lenient cleanup standards. But again, the same thing with the solar array. But again, they're going to look at potential threat to the environment and human health.
I think Bill is trying to underscore a really important point, and I think it's good for the public to know that depending on what it is decided, right? Is this what you're saying, Bill? That's going to determine the remediation, the scope of the remediation.
because if we go,
It's a factor that it's a critical factor that goes into the cleanup plan. If you're going to make it a daycare center for the most extreme conservative approach, you would have to meet their unrestricted standards, which are the most stringent cleanup standards.
Right.
If you're going to make and technically you could argue that a solar farm, guys, certainly if you don't think the same, is more like a commercial use.
So
And
does
that's
that
much more
does that
lenient.
also? I would assume so, but just to put it out there, does that affect the cost? I would assume for the town. The cost
Absolutely,
burden?
yeah. And again, there's a lot of factors, obviously, but you certainly are not going to turn it into a daycare center.
No, but what if it was just open space with trails? I mean, would that be less
That is
burdensome
absolutely-
than solar?
Yes, and again, that would meet. You would probably have to meet something called restricted residential to make it a park, and again, that's less stringent than unrestricted. And that's very often, a lot of municipalities do take brownfield-type properties and turn them into parks.
And we also have interest from the fire district and a possible substation, and, you know, there's some other uses that I think we need to kick around.
Yeah, Tom, I would add, the property is also, in its current state, going to be limited which way you go based on its current zoning. So my understanding is it's currently zoned residential. So theoretically, if you're going to have a residential type use for it, you'd have to meet a residential type standard. The next level up would be commercial. If you wanted to, which is less stringent, right? So less stringent soil cleanup, people may go that route because it's going to cost less. You have higher numbers to meet. It costs less to clean up. And then you have a commercial use on the property. But in your case, in order to do that, if you wanted to go that route, you'd have to change the zoning. So there's a lot of things that have to be considered here. But certainly the type of standard that is decided to shoot for, which is part of the alternatives analysis, helps to determine what the end use would be.
Because if we don't do anything with it and just let it go back to nature, you're gonna end up having trails, the neighbor's gonna walk in it, so we have to make sure, however we leave it, that it's safe for the neighborhood to use this piece of property for a walk-in or whatever they want to do.
That's right. I mean, the DC ultimately is still involved, and they you know, they're going to want to see our plan, what the alternative analysis is, and they're going to, you know, they'll go through that as they go through this report, and they'll have their own comments on it as well. So, you know, something has to be done to it. It's just a matter of to what extent in terms of the cleanup.
Because if we do a solar farm, the whole area is going to be fenced off, so no one can get there, which is not really fair for the neighborhood. If we decide to leave it open space, it's not going to be fenced off, so we have to make sure it's, you know, done properly, cleaned up.
Right, and again, it's done very often with brownfield, lightly contaminated sites that are certainly owned by municipalities where there's limited cleanup, and as long as you isolate the contamination that's on site that remains, that's an acceptable plan very often.
I mean, it's fenced now, right? Or I know it's got gates.
It's what?
It has a gate.
There's a gate on the main
Yes, there's a
driveway.
gate, but you can walk right
Not
around it.
fenced.
It's accessible now. The other thing that John pointed out, and part of the presentation, that this site is still zoned residential. So, but you're the town, I'm sure you can, if you needed to change the zoning, I would assume that's within your power.
To leave it open though, and
Should go.
I know enough to be dangerous with this topic, but to leave it open for the community to walk in, we'd be looking at excavating the soil. I mean, there'd be no cap at that point, right?
It would certainly be part of that, I think. And again, there's lots of different things you could do, but in this case, the most practical approach. And again, there's contamination on site, but there's also these mounds that have waste in it. That, regardless of whatever you want to do, that has to be addressed.
That should be addressed, because no matter what we do, we have to make sure this
You just
property
can't.
is safe for the neighborhood.
I mean, we're having this conversation, and it's like, it's almost like, you know, as a neighbor, I live across the street, hearing, you know, there's gonna be varying levels of cleanup. As a resident, I want the greatest extent of cleanup done that, you know.
Well, so the cleanup always is going to meet the environmental standard. There's just different ways to get there.
I mean, we've all already been taken off of well water, so we're all on county water now, so that's kind of out of the equation here, but.
Speaking of which, has the county water authority been working with respect to this analysis? Because especially if there's been travel.
Well, the Suffolk County Water Authority was involved.
The wells are all
back
far
in
to the north of
2018,
this.
2019. Once the town was alerted to the fact that there is contamination, Suffolk County Health Department came in and started testing well water, because obviously you guys know a lot of people in East Quogue are on well water. So they did a program back in 2019, 2020. And they put about 98 residents, including you,
I think I remember this.
public water. So that's addressed. That's one of the first things
Good.
you try to do is try to, and again, it comes down to what's called exposure.
And
The point you
I
were
think to
making,
Michael's point, though, the Suffolk County Water Authority wells are all far to the north of this site.
Okay,
they are not impacted by this.
that's good.
It doesn't mean that their well fields are not within areas that are
Has
impacted
the
by other
northern
things.
well has the northern topography? I guess the northern topography doesn't seem to
doesn't-
anticipate flow.
Doesn't flow north.
Okay.
It's safe to say Suffolk County Water Authority water is good.
Well, of course.
But you said that in 2018, the DEC found there was high quantities of PFAS in the groundwater. So now, because everybody's on the Suffolk County
Public
Water
water.
Authority public water, that's not an issue anymore.
Correct. And what we call in the science, that potential exposure route has been eliminated.
Great.
And I go back to
That's
what
what I
you were
wanted to
saying
hear.
about contamination. It's addressed by potential exposure. If there's very low concentrations in the ground, but it's 10 feet below grade, nobody's going to be exposed to that. And that's how the state looks at that. There are other factors. For example, in this case, we have contamination that's actively leaching and impacting the groundwater. Regardless of the fact that people are on now public water, that's still a degradation of
It
the
should- yeah, it
environment
should be
that needs
removed.
to be addressed.
Yeah, just like old potato farm where you have it 2 feet in the soil, all the
Right.
pesticides from years ago.
Right, well, that years ago was the Temec
Yeah.
potato bug pesticide.
But this is what's all in your report to the DEC to show how the depth of the soil
Correct.
contamination?
Basically, the RI report that we put together is basically a description of the contamination that we discovered and the extent of it, where it's going, what's it impacted, what it hasn't impacted. And that's the basis for deciding what to do about it. And we jumping around a bit, but that's going back to what Eric started. And again, it would be another, so going through the process again and jumping back to the next steps. After we get this RI report approved, we go to the engineering analysis and we develop a remedial plan in conjunction with whatever the town decides to do with the property. We put together another report with recommendations that get submitted as a remedial action work plan typically, what's it's called. And it goes through the logical sequence of different types of cleanups and then comes up with a scenario saying this is what we recommend. The state reviews that again and decides that's reasonable and we accept that, or they say, we want you to do this also.
They don't tell us what to do. We have to tell them what we're
We
proposing.
propose a remedy typically. Doesn't mean that we don't have I've certainly had meetings with the state to come up with reasonable, before we even submit a report, on what they would like to see, and that's certainly an option. But the typical scenario process by the regulations, you submit their remedial action work plan document, they review it, they say, your plan is acceptable, please move forward, or they say, we like your plan, but X, Y, and Z, you need to beef this up or add this, what have you.
Yeah. So have you ever seen circumstances where a municipality proposes a particular remediation plan, and the state comes back and says this plan is not suitable for this site? Has that ever happened? Or
You're never going to, well, it's certainly,
could?
yes, it's certainly possible.
There's
Again,
usually some back and forth between both parties and you discuss the different options, but the way the statute is set up, you're allowed to pick the most cost-effective remedy that's protective of human health and the environment.
Good. Okay.
So there may be little nuances, if the responsible party says they want to put in 3 extraction wells, the state may ask for 4 extraction wells. There's some back and forth, but basically the program's set up to allow you to pick the most cost-effective remedy that's protective of human health and the environment.
And that's Tom's job and our job. That's what we're here for, to steer you in that direction. We wouldn't put you in a situation where the state's likely to say this is not acceptable.
Right.
They're except typical cleanup scenarios that we'll come up with a reasonable plan that I think the state would accept with, some, that's my guess in this situation. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
What has to be done.
So those cleanup scenarios, that's the point where we give suggestions where what we might do with the property, so we know what category we fall into.
Right. Well, it's more than suggestions. It's more, hey, based on everything considered, we want to make it, again, we'll use the solar farm as an example. And then we build the remedy around that. If you wanted to make it ball fields, then we build the remedy around that. That may be, for example, on the southern portion of the site, there's some contamination. The northern portion of the site's clean, which is kind of what we found. Let's make the parking lot the southern portion, and then the asphalt cap serves as a cap, or the parking lot serves as a cap. And that's how it works in a general sense. In the case of the solar farm, they may want to put an asphalt cover and may not want the solar panels directly on the ground, anchored in the ground. I don't know. I'm not a solar panel engineer. But again, that's how it works typically, is you pick your, and the there's a back and forth, because some of the options for remedy may make more sense to develop it for a certain type of use. So there's a back and forth.
But it seems like a site that we could clean up without a lot of problem, and that, like Councilwoman McNamara said, we really have to get out to the public to see what they would like to see there, just to kind of categorize it down and say, yeah, we're going to do solar panels because that's the least intrusive, and then to turn around later and say, well, maybe we do want to park here, would be a different standard. So we need to know when we need to make that decision and how we get that out to the public.
Yeah, I think you guys are in a position where you can really start seriously thinking about those things.
Yeah, I would say once you submit the remedial investigation report to the state, when they come back and approve it, you need to start developing the alternatives analysis. And in order to evaluate the alternatives, you need to know what the land use is going to be.
But it's still in the long run that it has to be safe no matter what we do. And it should be the same safeness if it's going to be a park or a solar farm. Because what happens in 20 years, they might not want a solar farm, then it's gone, then it might be a park.
But in the first instance, it's an arc of, is the use ultimately going to be more passive, like a solar farm?
Yeah.
There will be less restrictive remedial action to be taken by the town.
That's absolutely correct. Because
But
if
how
it's
is
a,
that
I don't
the
agree with
case?
that.
Because isn't the contaminated soil, didn't you say it's leaching into the groundwater?
Yes.
So if we don't address it, that's gonna be a situation that continues.
yes, it
Correct,
does
but-
need to be addressed, but
So
I think
that's-
the kind of things that you're talking about is if you put a community garden in and people are planting tomatoes,
Yeah.
then that's one exposure pathway. If it's a solar field and you just have footings for solar panels, you don't have the same exposure as you would growing vegetables. So
But if
they
we
allow
don't
you to use different
If you
cleanup
don't remove the
standards.
contaminated soil, it'll continue to leach into the aquifer, won't it?
Well,
But
so one of the
they have
examples,
right? They have lookup tables that tell you what contamination levels you can leave for each compound for different land uses. They have residential, commercial, and industrial standards.
But I think on this instance, we should go to the most conservative one because, it could be solar farms for the next 10 years. It could be a park in 10 years later. So.
well,
there's
that
people-
wouldn't happen, because what would happen is, in that
I did
situation,
not interrupt you, sir.
I'm sorry,
So please do
I'm
not
sorry.
interrupt. What I hear is there's standards, and I just asked that. I says, if we're gonna clean it, it should be cleaned up the best way, so it's safe for the neighborhood in the community for whatever we use we have. If it's solar farms or bike, or if it just goes back to nature, or it's a ball field, it has to be cleaned up to the best way we can do it.
That's the
not-
numbers game because there's a
not-
price tag
not
for all of that.
where we're gonna do solar farms, we're gonna cap it with asphalt. The neighborhood doesn't want blacktop on 5 acres. I don't want to see blacktop on 5 acres. I want to see it cleaned up the best way, in the most environmentally friendly way for the neighborhood, so the neighborhood can, in the next 20 years, 30 years, do not have to worry about this site. Because when I leave this office, I don't have to say, well, you cannot plant tomatoes there, or you can't plant tomatoes in the yard next door. We're not here to do it halfway. We're here to make sure it's done properly and all the way.
No, and I apologize. I wasn't suggesting that, and you're certainly correct. And that's one of the things that goes into the consideration is what the town wants. And if the town wants to go that route, then absolutely, that would be the guiding principle of the alternatives that would be suggested, is that the town wants to clean it up to the maximum extent practical. I think all we're trying to say is that there are options if the town did not want to go that way. For example, if you wanted to make it a commercial use, the standards would be higher, the cleanup would be less expensive. In that case, what would happen is, to use your example, if it was made a solar farm and there was some capping that left some contaminated material in place, which was allowed under that use, there would be a restriction easement on the property that then you could not go back and make it a park, which obviously is something you would not want. So the only point I was trying to make is that there would be controls in place in that instance, that you couldn't take a less stringent remedy and then 10, 20 years later try to change the land use. In those instances, they put controls in place to prevent that.
I just have one question. There's a proposal here for fencing. Are we looking to fence the property completely right now?
The fence, and I'll just jump in. So when I hear from John and Eric and Tom here about one of the, because the DEC will be looking for the town to implement intermediate remedial measures, and one of them that's almost universally seen and used is fencing of the property. So having heard that, we had Nick and Tom look into it, and it would cost about $148,000. Which includes approximately $22,000 to $28,000 of clearing for the area for the fence to be put in. The fence that could be put in, my thought is, if you're going to do it once, do it right, so you're not having to replace or amend it, would be a fence that could be best used for all purposes, for end uses, whether it's a ball field, whether it's a solar farm and the like. So this fence was priced out in that capacity. And today is really to give you as much information as possible, because soon, within the next year or so, 6 months to a year or so, you'll be called upon to decide, what do we want to do? How much money do we want to spend to make this either pristine, less pristine, more residential friendly, or more commercial friendly, depending on how much money you're prepared to spend to rectify, remediate this plot of land, with hand in glove with what you ultimately want it to look like, whether it's a ball field, whether it's a solar farm, whatever.
I just personally hate to put a 6-foot, chain link fence with 3 wires on top of it around this entire property. I mean, it's heavily used by wildlife. It's a wildlife corridor here through here. You're basically taking 10 acres and you're just freezing out the wildlife.
That's a good point. You think it is a wildlife corridor?
I guess.
Yes. A lot of deer.
That's a good point.
And if
Thanks
we're
for
not
bringing
going,
that up.
if you're going with solar, I mean, that's one thing. Of course, you'd want it really, fenced off. But if it's going to be trails and bike trails and walking trails.
But again, it's just presenting you with as much information as possible so that you can make as an informed a decision as
I don't
possible.
like that option with the fence.
Whatever you
I'm just saying, I know that it's heavily used by deer and there's turkeys through there. I mean, there's just, obviously turkeys can
Here's the
fly the
problem.
fence, but.
And from the regulatory standpoint, from the DEC standpoint, is that there's contamination on site. People have access, wildlife has access to it, therefore they're potentially exposed to this contamination. The fence is the most cost-effective way to eliminate that exposure. And that's the way the state looks at it, and
Could we potentially fence with less? I don't know what kind of. You mentioned there's wire on this. I mean, is there a way that it could be?
The wire is to maintain a 7-foot minimum height, which I
So
believe is
Yeah.
standard.
Is there a way to make the fencing minimalistic, and is there a way to also not clear?
Yeah, but, I mean, when you clear for the fence, aren't you
Well,
gonna
it
have
is
to?
clear.
you're gonna
for
have
the
to
fence.
clear it to put the fence up there.
But like, what are we talking?
The
Like
good
a
thing about a
road?
fence is it's not permanent either, but right now,
But this sounds permanent, this kind of fence. I mean, this is like,
it's certainly meant to be
$150,000.
permanent.
And also
Like they just said, we're fencing it to like the
Yeah.
use that would need it for,
yeah, here, I think we just wanna be in a position to tell people, don't go in here, you know? And
I don't think
Tom,
anybody really-
would you be able to put a fence just in the hotspot areas, not the entire property?
I honestly, I don't know if we know enough to really define an area necessarily that would require it, and it would be more or less a third of the site, I think.
I mean, I get why we would want to warn people off, but it's been since, what, 2018? You know, how come the DEC didn't say anything before now?
Because they go through their process. That's,
Are
I
we,
guess, my best answer.
are we at this time
What's the
required to
expression?
install a fence?
What did you know and when did you know it?
Are we required to install a fence at this time?
Technically, no.
No, this was our suggestion. This is
My
our
guess
suggestion
is
because
the state's gonna require that.
how about if we post it, we post every 30 feet or 20 feet?
It's,
And I got another question too. What's the time frame to get this piece of property pristine?
the time frame for cleanup or
Get it-
the whole
The
process?
whole process,
Well,
the cleanup.
uh,
Is it 10 years, 5 years,
the
3
cleanup,
years?
no, once the remedy is selected, the engineering design is complete, it would be done in a year or less.
How far are we off from that?
In all practical purposes, I would say at least 18 months.
Because that's how long it's gonna take the DEC to
It's
respond to the
process,
report, and then
yes.
you've gotta come up
Yeah.
with the,
It's fairly close.
It doesn't mean that we can't try to expedite. It's up to the board. If you want to say, look, we want to set up a meeting in Albany tomorrow to talk to the group, the remediation group, that we want to advance this, fast track it, they would be open to hear that.
John was you were starting to say that your recommendation,
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, getting back to the fence. The fence was really our recommendation because from our perspective, it's a liability for the town. You've got a contaminated piece of property that's open to the public. So it's really about protecting the public, number one, and reducing your potential liability from any future dumping or continuation of dumping on the property, making it worse. So that's really how we looked at it. Now, whether or not you make a temporary fence or a permanent fence, that's really up to you. But our recommendation was in the short term to protect the public until the site's remediated and reduce, your liability.
I mean, personally, I'd be fine with something temporary, maybe something not as structured in a way that would harm wildlife.
So this
But-
fence, turkeys can fly. The reason that we go with the smooth 3-wire as opposed to barbed wire is so that the deer can scale the fence.
It is smoothed.
Yes. Straight up smooth, and the deer can scale the fence and they don't become entangled or otherwise injured. from
scale
falling.
the fence.
Yeah,
Yeah, like jump over.
jump over it.
They do that.
No, I know, but this is 6 foot high, and then is the stuff on the top.
Oh yeah.
So the reason
No,
we
but
go
why would you wanna why do you wanna prohibit the deer from accessing the property?
we don't. I was led to believe the fence had to be a minimum of 7 feet, but I never got an explanation as to why the 7 feet was required.
John, what's the explanation for that?
I don't think we
I-
necessarily
So,
specify
Yeah,
I'll
that.
take that. It was really the fence for all purposes. If we're gonna put a fence in there, let's spend the money once, rather than let's put a fence in and then amend it, and then that costs much more.
Yeah.
So that was really my,
But you had
Stamp.
solar in mind, but if we're not
But
doing
that's-
that, then
that's
this is
one aspect.
overkill.
So
I
if you're gonna
think
put
we
in
all think it's
fields,
overkill.
it's a different kind of fence.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'd be happy with a snow fence.
Yeah, just something to put a
Or-
post on, like,
Or
Yeah.
Keep
4 foot,
out.
or 4 foot yard guard, or
But that there's
Just-
something to
just
be
so
had for
everybody's
the
clear.
discussion with the state.
The rationale behind this, and we understand that you're bringing up valid points, but as John reiterated, there's a potential liability here. You leave it knowingly open to the public. And again, there's contamination on site. Is it radiation? Is it gonna kill you tomorrow? No, it's not, but there's a perception for the
that's
public.
open.
And the fact is, you do have contamination on site above regulatory limits. Therefore, if the town knowingly does nothing.
no,
Like
we're
we
not
have for
saying we don't wanna do
10
nothing.
years.
But we could say, you know, look, we're gonna put up the 4 foot snow fence with posted contaminated property, keep out, then I think that we've done our job.
That has been done, the posting, but again, that adds another element. The neighbors may not want to see a contaminated posted sign throughout.
We just say posted keep out. I mean, not that
That's
it's
it.
contaminated, it's.
Again, that's the reason for the fencing. It's not to limit it. It really, the most cost-effective way to eliminate that potential exposure of the public and wildlife.
So
But I mean, he's saying fence, deer can jump it,
Yeah.
rabbits can go under it, turkeys can fly over it, so you're just making it harder for the wildlife to access it, and they're still accessing.
Yeah, but it would
Or
keep
the
kids
deer
out.
stuck in the
Yeah, I don't
fence.
think we're worried about the animals accessing.
You want to
it.
keep children out.
It's the it's humans.
Yeah, but if you come across something with a fence with a
Yeah.
sign that says keep out, you know, if you go in there, that's, you know,
Like-
not on you, you really shouldn't be doing that.
We definitely can explore less costly alternatives. So I'll leave it at that. If
Yeah.
that's what the board
yeah,
wants
no,
to.
I know I get the liability concern, especially now that this is a work session and this is being talked about publicly. And I understand the concerns about, well, this has been this way since 2018, 2019, but
Before that,
well, no, in terms of since we've been
Knowledge.
exploring this as a town board, I think maybe there is merit to just having further discussion with council and with your team and Nick, and we should revisit that.
I think we all agree it should be fenced off somehow. It's just the degree to which you do that. I mean, you just want to put people on notice that they shouldn't enter the property. That's a lot,
I want to just, so my
Different.
plan, if you guys see it, I was, I guess, heavy-handed. I assumed they would need about 10 feet just to get machinery in there, but the contractor is comfortable with 3 to 5 feet of clearing.
And I'm just thinking a 4 foot pool fence keeps children out, so.
and what do you do with the soil that I mean, how do we know how to dispose of the soil we have to take
Well,
up for the fence?
That's a good point. What I would recommend at this point, if you are excavating, that you just make sure you leave it on site for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is when at least most of the boundary of the site, we don't find heavy contaminations, really more in the center. But if there is any limited excavation, right now, from a practical standpoint, do not take it off the site.
I mean, just as a point of reference, the Hills just fenced the entire property, and they did it with pounded in posts and 5 foot yard guard, and they did the whole site within a couple of weeks. So with minimal clearing. I mean, they did almost no clearing because they basically meandered the.
Yeah, so the clearing, it's not necessarily felling of trees, it's the underbrush and the bramble and all that stuff, just getting so that they can actually run a fence line. And if there's a big tree in the way, you can always go to the left or the right of the tree. There's no need to fell a tree for a fence.
And when you do the remediation, we have to bring in probably excavators and everything to take the soil out and move mounds. Does that have to be fenced in down the road? Will there be like a rent-a-fence around it to make sure that nobody just?
That would probably be part of the construction plan. But certainly, and again, I go back to the fact that you have the mounds of garbage, not garbage, but again, debris. Even if the site, we found no contamination, you're still gonna need to get equipment in there and sort that out, regrade the site. Some of that waste is probably gonna have to be shipped off-site. So yeah, to answer your question, yes.
Because you already know what's in it, right? That's what you've been doing, testing the soil?
Yes.
And excuse all the, I mean, this is the first time that we're having a discussion on this as a board with, you know, potential outcomes, so.
Right.
Won't be the last one. It'll, now they'll be much more regular. So what my concern, when I came onto it with Frank, and I spoke to John and Eric and Tom, is what is the time constraints right now? There are really no time constraints. But once this report is filed with the DEC, now you have the flow chart and where that's gonna start and how the board will be able to now have to review things more timely.
And in the meantime, I mean, I'm sure this is, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but I think for me, this has brought up some more questions about things that I guess we could email to you and you can
Right.
get us answers in the
Right.
meantime.
Right, and I'm looking to the professionals to like how to shepherd this through. So that's what the long story short.
And it makes sense to take a step back now because I was on the board prior, and that, you know, the ultimate purpose was a solar farm or a more industrial use. If we're thinking of incorporating the neighbors' opinions and figuring out a more passive use, then we have to pretty much start over.
Well, you
again.
were always going to take into account, you know, the local community or the community writ large.
Sure.
And balance that as against to, you know, what you really want to do, what you can do, and what you're prepared to pay for.
Yeah, and I think
So-
we've expanded the uses now, and I think that's great.
And I also think too, when we originally started discussing this, solar was kind of like, you know, it wasn't really in place and it was a benign thing, and now we've got a spot that a municipality has got just around the corner from this pretty much, and it's getting huge pushback for solar. So that's why I feel like it's really important for us to go to the community and say, hey, you know, we know people's perceptions on things have changed. How do you everyone feel about this?
And then, so,
Do you feel that you need a public outreach session to canvass the town residents for what they would want to do with their property?
Yes.
Because there's another step coming up. Once you submit the draft RI report, you have to, at a minimum, you have to send out a fact sheet. You have to mail a fact sheet to everybody that's listed in the community citizens participation plan. But there's an option to hold a public meeting. It's up to you. You can do either one. Either one satisfies the program. But one thing you may want to consider is having a public meeting to present the remedial investigation and then solicit comments.
Would you be
from
the one presenting on
citizen.
that? Would you be the one presenting?
Probably me.
Or you?
Yeah.
I mean, because we're actually, just in a timely fashion, this is on the heels of we're currently doing an East Quogue Park District.
Yes.
And we're preparing a mailing for a public hearing notice to go out for the Parks District.
Combination.
And we're paying for that mailing already. If we wanted to set up a work session date and put that on the card as well, potentially, it would go to every home in the East Quogue School District. So,
That's the right thing to do because
Oh, we have there's a citizens participation plan that already has a list of who to go out to. That's already been developed. Frank and I set that up a while ago.
well, the one we have with the school districts is updated all the time.
So I don't know if you need an outreach session to get feedback from the residents on what to do with the land.
I think the residents deserve to be outreached because they're neighbors. If I lived in that neighborhood, I would want to know what's going on. Just like Cindy, if she wasn't there, she would want to know what's going on in her neighborhood. It's-
If I may, John, Eric, so part of the component of the filing of this remedial investigation report to the DEC, doesn't that also trigger a requirement that it's essentially published to the public, such that we would put a copy of it on the website but a copy of it would also go to Rogers Memorial Library.
The document repository, that's correct. The program requires that you put the final report in the document repository and that you send a fact sheet out to the mailing list that's included in the citizens participation plan. So that's the minimum you have to do. But you can have a public meeting. You're allowed to have public meetings. Some people, some responsible parties really want to have the public meetings. That they want to get buy-in from the citizens through the process. Some people don't want to do public meetings because it generates a lot of comments that you have to respond to. So it's really your choice.
I'm just going to put out there that nobody in East Quogue has access to Rogers Memorial Library.
But that has been the designated
Depository?
depository. But we're, in addition to that, voluntarily on our own, we will have it posted on the website.
Okay.
And plus the library could share it with another library to the west.
Yeah.
That's true. And
And the library can just direct people to a PDF file. That doesn't have to be a paper copy.
Okay.
So now also your contract has expired? And so we need to, you're requesting that we extend the contract for another year?
Extend
Yeah.
the time, right, John? The time.
Yeah, correct. Just the time, I think it was up April
Time for
30th.
MacTech. And for
Correct.
because of the extra work, we need not only the contract time extension for D&B, but also I think it's another $50 or $60,000.
It's under 60, but it's for the, in a nutshell, the state, before, we didn't have the full scope. We had a prior amendment for other out-of-scope work. We didn't have the full scope for the fish and the surface water sediment. What Frank did is he put a small contingency in the last amendment, but the scope of work for this fish sampling, what the state required, was quite a bit more. So, long story short, we need about $59,000 just to pay off the fish sampling, which has been done already, and then bring this report to closure. That'll get us to that point.
So there was a town board resolution that was tabled on Tuesday, and then there was a draft town board relative to MacTech contract extension. Then there's Tatiana's, I had her prepare a draft town board resolution relative to D&B for the contract extension relative to time and for the monies that are necessary to close this out, to get us to over the finish line with respect to the remedial investigation report.
And then with the feasibility analysis, is that something you could provide a
That's something
proposal
different. Yes,
to us for?
We can give you a scope and budget to complete that. However you want to break it up. We could, the other aspect that I'm seeing that we don't have budgeted for is public participation. It sounds like this, once this gets rolling and the public gets involved, you're going to need support from WSP as well as D&B on public meetings and things like that. So there should probably be some budget set up to help you with that as well.
Yes, it's very important.
And we can all work with Tatiana to flesh out what those could be, and we can present those in exec session to say essentially what would you guys want to do, and then go from there, and then ultimately have those new contracts, those new proposals fleshed out for your final approval. And it's just basically giving you as much information as possible, you deciding what you want, then we'll move from there.
Because we definitely have to go to the public to make this most transparent
Right.
for the neighborhood.
I just wanted to add one comment on the fish sampling, so you're aware, somebody did raise the question back in the beginning. We did push back on that when the DEC came forward with it. We did feel it was a bit of a stretch.
Yes, that's a good point, John.
I remember that.
So we didn't just roll over on that, but
That's
unfortunately,
good to
yeah.
And somebody got to go
You know,
fishing.
and just, I don't know how much you want to get into the weeds as far as what we found, but again, going back to the issue of the fish and the sediment in the ponds, we found PFAS in the sediment, in the fish, but we're testing it at parts per trillion. And to give you a sense of what parts per trillion is versus what 10 years ago, nobody tested for parts per trillion. We were always doing parts per billion, or in some cases, parts per million. It's orders of magnitude higher. So it's, when you test that parts per trillion, you find it. You find it everywhere. I'll find it on John's skin at parts per trillion. So keep that in mind. So we find it in the fish, but we're not finding it at any levels that are even close to being above regulatory limits, or that would be a certain threshold where
They keep changing the limits to make it even
they
harder to meet?
Yes, and they're evolving, again, because they're emerging contaminants, so their numbers, and they don't have a lot of standards right now for fish consumption, but they do have some. We're not even close. We're orders of magnitude lower than any current on the books fish consumption.
Do they even know yet if it like cooks out of things?
I hope so.
They're forever
Random question,
chemicals, so
but-
my guess is you can't cook them out. They're just wonderful little chemicals that we've used in everything. But the point being is that, and again, this is going to be important for the residents to know, is that you're on public water. We've tested the fish, it's okay. We've tested your surface water, it's okay.
Right.
The other thing about fish, testing fish, they don't stay in one little
area.
We all know, if you live by the sea, you fish, you know that a snapper bluefish is not going to stay in Phillips Cove or Creek.
Plus the life cycles are just.
They're out of there in the fall, and they come back as adult bluefish in the spring. So it's hard to really even quantify any potential contribution to
You're
this.
better off doing the shellfish, the mussels and the clams.
That's actually a good
So-
point, though.
The point is that it's good news that when it comes to presenting this information to the public, we can assure them that we've tested, and that's one motivation of the state as well, because they've been there, they've been at public meetings and say, well, I eat this fish, I fish here. We have an answer for them.
And it's not even D&B giving the A-OK. It's the DEC allowing for the report to be received, that it has been set up appropriately, and they're giving the imprimatur that this is appropriate.
Right.
Well, thank you.
Thank
This
you
has
very
been
much.
very
Thank you.
informative.
Yeah.
Thank you, all three of you.
Yes, thanks.
So much.
Covered a lot of ground.
Yes.
So the detail, for the report, well, we didn't really go over it in detail, and the specifics of it are really highlighted in the first, pages 2 to 5.
Will that be available to the public, the
We
report?
can post that on the community project.
Yeah. Is that something that we
It's
can?
basically a summary of our findings. I don't see why you couldn't.
Well, but maybe we're talking about, maybe we should wait and post the actual submission to the DEC. This is like a
On
working.
further thought, I wouldn't this is a working document, I would.
Right.
And very often the repository doesn't receive, sometimes it's different, but the repository, more often than not, is that the state has to approve it, then it goes into the repository. When you start putting, and I have other clients that the state release draft documents, and it really can create some.
Yeah, no, I get
The
it.
final report will be published
Okay,
and made available, and then there's the fact sheet that also
Perfect.
they'll prepare to go with that, and that.
that will eventually go
on
up there.
the
That's
website.
fine. So we moved too quickly there, but thank you, Council. And
Yeah.
Just one more thing. So the outcome of the fence, we're not gonna do,
Nick's gonna get us
Have
some
they had instances?
revised.
I'll talk to you guys about what.
Yeah, no barbed wire, please.
There was never barbed wire.
It said barbed
Well-
wire.
No,
That
no,
in
it's
place
not.
of-
It's smooth.
It's covered. It's
So-
It's smooth, there's no barbs.
can I just ask the Council to?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, have they had instances, with code enforcement where the people have been getting through or entering the property that we've had to concern ourselves beyond regular, just being concerned?
you're
I
muted.
asked-
Perhaps
Your
something
mic.
less like industrial
Well,
internal.
this fence, so for everybody's edification, it's the same fence that encompasses North Sea Transfer Station.
Right, but this is a different
Yeah.
piece and.
But
Feel.
I'll talk to the board outside of a workshop.
Okay. Thank you.
Good
Happy
morning.
to help.
Yeah.
Good
and
morning.
Let us know when it goes to the state. We'll be interested to know when it's final and submitted. And then, of course, tell us when you hear back.
I see this going out certainly early July. What I will do now, one of the things is the DEC project managers changed. And I've only had brief conversations with the new project manager. But when we're ready to send that out, I'm going to give the man a call and explain that it's coming. And it's still not clear how much he's familiar with the site and his workload, but we're going to emphasize that we'd like to try to get comments back as quickly as possible from them.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I apologize for being late. I thought, I'm a savvy Long Island. I said, you better leave yourself time for, heading west to Southampton.
There was an accident.
We were all late today,
Yeah,
so
right.
don't give it another
There was
thought.
a bad accident right by, like
Hampton.
Old Riverhead Road.
Yeah,
Ambulances and everything. Anyways.
yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Bye, everyone.
Good morning.
And thank you, John.
Okay, happy to help.
Yeah,
Thanks, Nick.
very interesting.
You guys want me to, you still want me to stick around, or?
Well,
There's nothing else on.
It's a little late, I don't know, you let me know.
I just wanted to have a couple of questions.
okay. If he
You don't
has,
mind.
if he has the answers, I don't want to
Yes.
catch you unprepared
No,
for
Well,
what's
what do
being
you,
asked.
you want me to ask me questions, you want me to
No.
blow through an update?
just to update all the projects we are working on.
It's okay. Thank you, John.
Good morning.
We are 45 minutes past.
Okay, so I'll start with projects that are currently in construction. Most of them are finishing up, thank goodness. Rick, we talked, the Hampton Bays Bike Trail. The bike trail is complete through Good Ground Park. They are finishing the road work today. They will be laying out the pavement markings this afternoon, tomorrow, and then striping Monday night and Tuesday night. And that project should be done. A couple of punch list items. West Hampton Transfer Station, for anybody that's not aware, we're in the process of installing, the gate is there, an
The
automatic
what?
slide gate. West Hampton Transfer
The
Station.
gates.
The main gate off of Old Country Road. So there's a ongoing issue there where we have the police shooting range in the back. We're closed on Wednesdays. There's also a highway yard.
Highway goes
So
in,
highway goes in, the police go in, and they leave that gate open
then people go in.
at all various times, either before the center is open, after the center is closed, and on Wednesdays when the center is supposed to be closed. And then it allows unauthorized access. People go in there and dump their trash on Wednesdays. So
I've never seen the gate open on a Wednesday. But
yeah,
okay.
sometimes even if it's not, I mean, I was out there personally working with contractors and the gate was closed and somebody opened the gate and came in on a Wednesday. Amazing.
Because it wasn't locked.
So long and short of it is automatic slide gate has been installed. Town staff, town maintenance staff, and myself will be installing the electric to that gate on July 9th. And then we'll have a nice new automatic gate with a keypad. So that allow police access, highway access, and of course town access, and keep anybody else out because that gate will close and not open unless you have a code.
Okay.
Flanders Community Center, that's 90% complete. We installed a bocce court and a paver patio in the rear yard. On the top side, outside of the senior center, we're also installing concrete game tables. The slab for the game tables are in, but the tables were a little delayed by the manufacturer. We expect those to be installed the week of July 7th, and then that project will be complete.
Wasn't there a jungle gym or something too?
Jungle Gym is secondary to this, but yes, once this is done, we will place the order for the Jungle Gym, and then the Jungle Gym is going to go on the back. So you'll have bocce, Jungle Gym, Gaga pit, and Tracy also has some type of, like, I always forget the name of it, funnel ball, excuse me. It's kind of like basketball, but it's a funnel and it goes in those numbers and it keeps score of which hole it comes out of.
We're on budget with all of that.
Yes, well, under budget, thank goodness.
Good.
20 South Valley Road, that's a CPF property in Hampton Bays. There's a bunch of derelict structures there. 2 of them were riddled with asbestos. We are in the process of demoing them. We started Tuesday. They're out there now. We expect that work to be complete next week, and then I am going to coordinate with Waste Management and Highway to do a property cleanup, if you will, because there's still a bunch of sheds and debris piles.
We could do that in-house. The ones with asbestos, we could not do that in-house. That's why.
And as a little interesting tidbit, the Department of Labor actually paid us an inspection yesterday, or paid us a visit for an inspection yesterday, and we passed with flying colors. The DOL administers all the asbestos regulations. So being an asbestos project, and I think this is the third one we've done. We've done Bel Air, 33 Bay Avenue, and now this. I think they figured they'd just come and make sure we were doing everything right, and we are.
Oh, great.
So yes, that's very good. And then the last one, glass crusher at North Sea. Our consultant is progressing the design, and a sub-consultant to our consultant was out there today conducting soil borings at the site to assess the bearing capacity and the types of soils. The glass crusher in itself exerts a lot of vibrations, so we need a seismically designed pad so that where it actually sits does not,
We don't
destroy
want
the machine or destroy whatever pad we construct.
we don't want to crack the solar panels.
and crack
How
the
did we
soil.
determine the size of the equipment that we were gonna use?
Tom selected a glass crushing plant, and it was based on the size of that glass crushing plant. And really, there's not too many different. It's kind of like a big, trommel screen. It's just crushes grass at one end and then sends it out.
He's also working on a site plan for the transfer station where all this equipment's gonna go.
Yeah, because in addition to that, there's the cardboard baler. If we're still doing that, this is more Tom's wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's of
And
course,
a couple of containers for recycling initiatives.
yeah, so eventually Tom's supposed to have a layout where everything goes, so everything be organized. So we don't have to say, oh, we put this in the wrong place.
If you could actually just make sure Tom knows that at some point he should get back to us on that with that
Yes.
layout,
Okay.
if that's
Yes.
okay.
I've been asking him to do that.
What about the columns in Bridgehampton?
We're getting there.
Oh, I thought you were done.
You
Nope.
should have-
I
So
thought.
those were the ones in construction. Now we have upcoming construction. Number
Okay.
one is Bridgehampton Community House. The contract was executed yesterday, I guess. I got the email today. I don't know if you signed it this morning or last night. So I have to schedule a kickoff meeting for that, week or two, and that'll be underway. That'll take, there won't be much to see there. They're gonna come, they're gonna remove, and we'll discuss this at the kickoff meeting. They're either going to temporarily brace that portico, and remove the 4 columns, and then all the restoration work is done in a shop, and then ship the columns back and reinstall them, or they're going to still temporarily brace them, but to a lesser extent, and take some number less than 4 away and reinstall and go that way. But really, as far as on-site work, it'll be a day here, a day there as they remove and reinstall a column. It's not going to be complete active construction site. Town Hall Masonry. Bids were opened on the 4th. The consultant that's going to oversee all the construction, their contract was authorized Tuesday, so we're now going to get that contract executed, get them on board. But the low bidder came in substantially under budget from what we anticipated. We have a very, very comfortable contingency, if you will, to do some additional improvements. I know Bill mentioned this morning those steps that you guys all
Yeah,
dangerously
that's a
traverse
nightmare.
every day, so we
Do
likely
we
can
do a
address
change
those.
order to include that in the project?
Yeah, we have,
It's more solar lights out there, so.
do you want me to give you the figure publicly, or?
It's not necessary. What else?
Animal shelter, so you all got that, or I sent the email to you, but the animal shelter, 3 projects at the animal shelter. We're going to be replacing the flooring, we're going to be replacing the kennels, and we're going to be replacing the sanitary system.
We just had a resolution on Tuesday to go out to bid for the kennels.
Tuesday was for the kennels, correct, so that is on the street next Thursday, excuse me.
Did we send out for bid the other 2 components of the?
So the sanitary system will be on your next town board meeting to notice those, and then that'll be a Thursday thereafter. And the flooring, we can use a requirements contractor. That is also scheduled at your next town board meeting to authorize use. It's a North Hempstead requirements contract.
And Nick, all of those different efforts are on schedule?
They are on schedule, yes. Happy to report. Everybody will
We're gonna get the
be,
bids back and be able to analyze them and award the bids and get all the insurance and everything and get going on September 1st. I mean, that's,
September
Delicious.
1st is Labor Day, but shortly thereafter, 1st or 2nd
that's when I
week.
think the animal shelter's planning to have.
Yeah, I need the animal shelter out of there as soon as possible in the beginning of September. The flooring contractor is going to remove the kennels.
And you're speaking with the animal shelter, right? You're keeping them posted? as things are moving along?
Yes, as much as I need
Okay,
to.
I want to make sure that that's happening, and we're going to be meeting internally. Just make sure, like, as everything moves to the next step, that they're
Yeah, we
informed.
were setting up a meeting, or
Yeah,
Jackie
there's
was setting
something
up a
that's-
meeting in
that's
like 2
set
weeks
up.
or
I
so.
just want to make sure that in the interim that your office is also coordinating to make sure that the animal shelter is aware of all the
Yes.
different steps.
So once they're out, I can get the flooring contractor in there. The flooring contractor is going to remove the kennels and replace the flooring. That can be done concurrently with sanitary system upgrades. The outlier is the actual kennels. I'm pushing the manufacturer on the kennels to get them to us quicker than 12 weeks, which I think is absurd. Whether they do it in partial shipments or just expedite the whole order. But yeah, they're quoting a 12-week lead time for the dog kennels, which would put us closer to Thanksgiving than, yes.
Isn't
And
there
these-
some other vendor we can avail
This is
ourselves
starting to
of?
sound like a town hall sanitary upgrade project.
These are,
We told them 2 months, not,
these are the kennels they selected. So that's up to the animal shelter whether or not they want to accept, which I don't in prior conversations think they would, but
was
accept.
only one source of these?
Well, it's a prerogative based on what they feel is best for the animal's welfare. So that has been a topic of discussion at some of our meetings. I know Nick did do his research to try to suggest that maybe there'd be some alternative considerations, but they are pretty sold on the type that they feel like they need for the
Then they
animals.
should be calling them up and telling the people to get going on it.
There's only one vendor
I've
that
already called multiple
supplies them?
times and emailed Guy Cosgrove is his name to express the urgency in doing this. And it'll be something we discuss at the
Yeah, we'll
meeting
meet-
in
we'll
2
talk about
weeks,
that, yeah.
just so that, because that is, they haven't signed any leases yet, and that's my understanding why we're meeting, to make sure that they can go forward. So there might need to be an adjustment made that if these are the kennels that they are dead set on getting, this is the time frame that we're being told we can obtain those kennels in.
Right.
Installation of them, I got the installation instructions because
Right.
we wanted to see maybe town labor could do this. I don't think it's beyond town labor to do it. It's nuts and
I
bolts.
don't understand, the kennels, we're going out to bid for that.
Correct.
So how do you know the timeline already when you don't, I mean, maybe there's other vendors that are gonna respond and they can provide the,
This is the manufacturer.
materials?
So I'm specifying a Samsung Galaxy. Provide me with a Samsung Galaxy or equal. I want the Samsung Galaxy if I'm the animal shelter, and I called Samsung, and Samsung said they can get me this phone in 12 weeks.
okay.
So that's how I get
Yeah,
that
it's a,
figure.
it's a preference based on what they feel like they're familiar with and they feel is best.
Well, they know, they work with it.
That is the animal shelter, but everything's on time to get us to the point where we can place orders. It's just how fast we can get those kennels back.
Okay.
And lastly, the Jackson Avenue study. We just executed that contract and got a purchase order. I'm scheduling a kickoff meeting for that, the supervisor's office, and the West Hampton Activity Center. That will be noticed for bids on July 22nd, and bids will be coming back, I believe,
July 22nd.
July 22nd. Yeah, there's a little, I know
No,
it's about a month behind where we want it to be,
yes.
but it's important at the end that we get the, not the specifications, but the boilerplate really correct. And that was what kind of pushed it a little bit farther.
Okay,
And Tatiana's been great. Tatiana has, both of us have read it, but she's gone even farther than me and actually started making changes from a document that the consultant suggested we use that we really don't want to take everything. So she has taken what was good in that document and put it into, we'll say, the town's language. But that's where we are.
she's working with Mark McRedmond on that?
She's working with Mark and the consultant to get that all
Big Mark.
tied away. Big Mark.
We love them.
All right. That's all I got for you guys. Any questions, concerns?
Thank you very much. You're doing a good job.
That's a great update, thank you.
Cool job,
Tried
good
to be
job.
fast. Take care.
Thanks again, Nick.
Oh.
Okay, I got another update next week from you.
All right.
Okay, well, that brings us to our town council member and supervisor's update. think we started with you last time. Do you want to go first?
I will. There's a lot to actually cover because we didn't have a meeting last week. We attended a Flag Day ceremony at Hampton Bays School honoring Judge Pat Gunn. It was a great ceremony. It was a packed room. But it was a great ceremony, and it was nice to honor Judge Gunn. I walked the Hampton Bays Bike Trail with Kristen Doulos, Nick, and Lieutenant Spencer. We went over some possible safety enhancements, some signage. There was discussion about,
Where?
the bike trail
Oh, the bike trail.
in Hampton Bays. So we walked the whole trail back and forth. It's actually a beautiful trail. It's kind of amazing. Like if I was a mom, I would take a book to the park and I would just let the kids ride back and forth on that bike trail because it's fantastic. And we had yesterday, Michael and Rick joined me at the Reeves Bay ribbon cutting. Supervisor, I know you had East End supervisors and mayors.
Yeah, I was sorry to miss it.
It was
But I am
it
going
was
to get over there.
it was a scorcher, but it was beautiful. It was really beautiful.
They did
So,
a great job.
They did.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
All right,
Oh,
thank
wait,
you.
I have one more thing.
What?
Yesterday we had our first Safe in Southampton Coalition meeting, being run by Kim Laube from Hugs. We had our first meeting with a lot of the sector leaders. There's leaders from business, media, school. There's just a whole bunch of great group of people. It was a great meeting. It's Cheryl's on there. Yep, Lars, Jason Belkin from Hampton Coffee, Teresa Roden from iTry, Gianna Volpe from WLNG, and we had a really good meeting. It was a good kickoff. We have decided not to actually go for the federal grant that we were intentionally going to seek this year because of cuts to federal grants. We were under a really big time crunch to get it out. So we felt that instead of this year, I know Hugs has funding to kind of get us started and get us going this year, and then we'll address the grant next year. But really great group of people, really looking to do good things, and I'll be coming back to you guys with other things that the town can partner with them on.
Great. We look forward to hearing about it. Thank you. Michael?
Thank you. So it was a very busy couple of weeks. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple. We did have a great CAC West meeting. Nick Jimenez actually joined us to go over the West Hampton Community Center project, just to hear from what the community has to say about, what they'd like to see in terms of like plantings and stuff like that. So it was a good meeting. Also, I had the opportunity to go to the Our Fabulous Variety Show graduation event where, and just in case you need to know, our Fabulous Variety Show does work with our youth bureau, various programming, and they do a lot in the arts to try to get kids to express their talents in acting and music. So it was a really nice ceremony, and a lot of the kids talked about their experiences, so it was really nice. Also attended the iTry Sweet 16 Gala with Teresa Roden, with legislator Welker. It was nice to be there, and some of the folks from the East Hampton Town Board were at both events. And just this morning, we had our Edie Windsor press conference where we discussed the importance of LGBTQ equality and how people can contribute to our Heart Memorial, and they can contact your office. Jackie can guide them to the instructions on how to donate and contribute to
Donate, get a heart-shaped
brick.
brick, put your name on it.
Yeah, and all the proceeds go to the maintenance of that memorial grounds, and also to Stony Brook University's Edie Windsor Health Clinic. So
Thank you.
Michael, do
Thank
you
you,
have-
Michael.
Is there a fund to make the next step for the pogo ball?
yeah, so that's a good point, Bill. So Clerk Sunday Schermeyer and I are working to make sure that we're moving on, to move that process forward to continue to beautify the the Hart Memorial location, and we're working on looking at a pergola over there. So it's a nice little place where people can get married, and and you know, when you do purchase a brick, yes, a percentage does go to Stony Brook, but a percentage also goes to the maintenance of that ground.
Nice, thank you. I had one of the East End supervisors and mayors meetings yesterday, and we had a special presentation from some of the East End chiefs. Chief Kiernan was there, Quogue Chief Isola, and Sag Harbor Chief Drake, and they talked about the Family Service League and what that organization does for our departments. They bring mental health services. So if the police respond to a call when there's a mental health crisis, then Family Service League has somebody there and available that they can interact with, and they guide the police as to what has to happen and where the person is taken. So it's very interesting. And of course, they're looking for some funding, this Family Service League. They're gonna contact us and let us know, maybe all of the East End towns can help with that. And then our own Ryan Murphy came and spoke with us about rentals, Airbnb use, and short-term rental solutions, and talked about best practices and informed us about software that's out there, and just wanted to hear back from the other towns and villages about what they're doing. And I know at some point he'll be coming to us as a board to talk about this software that might be able to help us regulate it.
Again?
I know it's been going on for a long time. Predates me, that's for sure. That's all. Thank you.
I apologize, I left my list home, but I do remember one thing, that West Hampton, we picked out the finishings for the West Hampton Senior Activity Center, which is a big step. We did it all in a few hours. Myself and the supervisor.
I know
Nick,
you're going to love it.
And the interior decorators.
Well, yeah, it was, just the architects came in with samples of things, so.
So it's closer to
Sure
putting
that
a
they
shovel in
can
the ground.
come in here and show everybody, and then that'll get incorporated into the bid specs.
So I'll start off with, last week we had a Franca meeting, and I'm bringing it up. It's the second time in a couple months that I've brought representation from the PD. Lieutenant Schottenhamel came, Officer Bank and Quintera. And from last month to this month, the PD has had quite a presence in Flanders, and the general public who were at the meeting noticed it, and they wanted to thank the PD for what they've done. And the PD also got into what the process is. If someone comes to your house for a noise complaint and speeding in your neighborhood and so on. So I want to say thank you to the PD for sending some excellent representatives, and also for really speaking with the public. That's probably the 5th time in a year and a half that they've been to a Franca meeting, not including all the other meetings they go to, but that. So it was very positive. I also joined the Southampton Town Chiefs meeting. I'll just give you one of the highlights. The planning that they put into an event that you and I don't give much thought to, that basically goes through, Ryan Murphy and the big events. The major emphasis was on the Palm Tree Festival and how they set up a command center and so on for that. And it's really intricate on how they do it, and the communication between the departments. It's pretty amazing to sit at those meetings and to be able to see the behind the scenes and really thank those guys for what they do. Michael and I were on a community housing Zoom, basically with CDLI, about ADUs throughout the town. And it was impressive that the amount of ADU applications are relatively equal throughout the town. Whereas maybe Hampton Bays has 5, Watermill has 4, and so on, that it was spread out throughout the town, which is one of the board's goals, that we do have affordable housing throughout the hamlets. So that was fun. Last night was the EMS advisory meeting. Hot as hell yesterday, not greatly attended, but they did have their Zoom option. And one of the things they spoke of, and it goes back to the wildfires, is that the radio communication was a little difficult. Not everybody was on the same radio system. There was one command center from the county. The good news is it seems like everybody now is what they call the 800 radios, and everybody can communicate with the county directly. So, and amongst themselves, there's several channels. If they have issues with one, they can go to another. And at least in the event of another wildfire or any catastrophe, they certainly can now communicate with the county and the state. So it was a good meeting for that. Last but not least, I want to give a thank you to Cindy McNamara. You know, the banner program in Good Ground Park with the veterans, I get so many comments on that. And they always want to know why we don't do it in East Quogue and why we don't do it in Southampton Village and so on and so forth. That, you know, I really hope this grows bigger legs and we really get to do it throughout the town because it's an excellent program. And last but not least, tonight at Good Ground Park is our first concert of the summer, 7 p.m. Get there early if you plan on parking anywhere near the park.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
They still have overflow parking at St. Rosalie's?
As long as St. Rosalie's is not doing something special, yes.
That's a good point you brought up about the chiefs meeting where you talk about the plan for the palm, which a lot of people don't realize that when they have the concert there, there's a lot of other stuff that goes along what we have to plan for the town and to protect the other people. And when Lance came in, he said that he didn't want us to do this, for the chiefs to do that, which is a good point that we have to do it.
We do it anyway if there's an event permit put in, or if we know there's going to be a major event. And it doesn't have to be just something with the nation. It could be the Hampton Classic.
Yes.
I know the steps that they put through, you know, you see the dollar amount sometimes that we waive for some of these events. But it's really the police doing their due diligence, the fire department doing their due diligence. You know, we may have a half a dozen plainclothesmen. We may have a lot of things that we never see, cameras. You know, the amount of planning they put into these major events is pretty impressive.
It is. And it's all volunteer from the fire department who pitch in.
Yeah, and to Bill's point, it's not just the coverage for that event, you know, it's if Southampton Fire Department is on call and on standby and at the site, they need coverage at their firehouse. And so it becomes multiple agencies getting involved. And, you know, like I made the point of just, you know, they did have Northwell ambulance on site, but they became overwhelmed and they didn't have enough response. So Hampton Bay's ambulance stepped in and answered and did a transport. So somebody has to coordinate all of that. It doesn't just happen and people don't just appear and disappear from the site. They have to traverse big areas of the town to get there. So I want to thank, and I think Ryan and Chief Kiernan, I want to thank them for doing such a great job with that. I mean, you talk to people and they're like, oh, that happened. And that's just the level of, you know, work that they put into it. And like I said, they revised that safety plan for that event 5 times and, you know, put things in it that weren't thought of because this is a huge corporation that does these all over the world, but they don't usually deal with volunteer services and they don't deal with the coordination of that. So I want to give them a big shout out for making that happen.
Everyone who volunteered, who had involvement should be thanked.
Yes.
And just a note on that, on the EMS Advisory Committee, there is representation from both Stony Brook, Southampton, and Northwell. So we did get reports from their end on how the festival, you know, went about.
Good.
That's good.
Thank you. All right, well, if no one has any other comments, then I move to go into executive session for acquisitions and then close the meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.